April 10th, 2026. We are in the 5th year and day 46 since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Welcome to the Situation Report. Today we will see a bit less from the front, but instead we will see some interesting videos. We will also see some punitive measures on the Russian side again. We'll take a look at what's currently being discussed between Russia and Ukraine. And then we'll also take a look at the direction in which this war is currently developing, especially on the military side of both parties, as well as much more. A viewer sent me the following video and asked a question about it that I would like to answer. In the video, you can see a drone flying toward a Russian soldier. He lies down comfortably on the ground, stays completely motionless, and the drone still impacts right next to him. Of course, that makes sense since he's obviously right in front of the drone. Then the question came up, why doesn't he run away? Why doesn't he shoot at the drone? Why doesn't he try to dodge at the last moment, but just lies down and waits to die? The most likely explanation is simple. No, it's not just that he doesn't want to fight in the war anymore. That could be true, and maybe he's already given up mentally. But the reason is probably something else, and that's pretty bitter too. I'll explain why that is. This soldier is acting according to outdated training, because we see this very often here. Soldiers lie down and wait. Soldiers stand still and wait. Surely not all of them want to kill themselves. When drone warfare began, things were very different. The cameras were worse. The footage, the quality just wasn't good enough for you to quickly tell people and other objects apart at first glance, especially as a fairly young and inexperienced drone pilot. By the way, the flight time was also very limited. Target acquisition was much less accurate. Back then, many soldiers were taught to just lie flat, not move, and reduce their silhouette. That way, you had a very good chance of being overlooked. And that actually worked quite often back then. Just think of the old footage. Most of it was even in black and white. Or if the drone was already almost out of radio range, there was a lot of interference, so something like that could actually work. But today things are different. The drones see much more, stay in the air for a long time, and also have time to consciously choose their targets. A fiber optic drone, for example, has almost no interference at all, so you can see perfectly what's in front of the drone. So just lying down and staying still, as we've often seen before, doesn't help anymore. So if someone with this old training ends up in a situation like this one, they'll fall back on it. Not because it makes sense, but because that's what he was taught, and as the only soldier, that's what he naturally trusts, and that's exactly what you see here. I hope I was able to answer it well. A video shows 2 Russian soldiers each with a wooden log tied across their shoulders, while their arms are also fixed to it. In this state, they are then driven through a forested area. According to available information, this is, unsurprisingly, supposed to be a disciplinary measure, allegedly for leaving their positions. Scenes like this keep appearing from time to time and also provide insight into how disciplinary problems are handled within individual units. Such measures are less aimed at having an immediate effect on those affected, but rather at deterring other soldiers who may have considered the same idea, such as desertion. I like to show such measures. Whether you, as a viewer, are more pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, or simply a neutral observer, you should still get a good insight into the Russian army, and that is simply part of it. And if we remember everything we've seen so far, then this is a comparatively mild punishment. As a rule, those who are punished are usually the first to be sent into the next assault after serving their punishment. And you know the chances of survival aren't very high. But at least you didn't have to suffer as much as many others who, for example, were treated like dogs and kept in kennels. Subscribers and viewers who have been around for a while, they know what I mean. A rather contradictory picture is emerging around the announced Easter ceasefire. At this point, I should probably mention again that this refers to the Orthodox Easter, which isn't until this Sunday. From the Ukrainian perspective, the topic of a ceasefire was already brought up and proposed a few days ago. Kyiv had indicated that it was basically ready for a ceasefire and talks in order to avoid any acts of war during the holiday. However, these were not accepted by Russia. Shortly afterwards, there were also statements from the Russian side that went in a similar direction, namely that the Ukrainian side urgently needed it, or that exhausted armies in general would benefit from it. Of course, this refers to the Ukrainian army, because of course Russia's army doesn't need a break since they're not exhausted. That's why their offensive is going so incredibly well, and the full-scale invasion has only been going on for 1,507 days. Now, Vladimir Putin has announced a limited to 32 hours ceasefire over Easter, of course for the sake of the Ukrainians. It is supposed to start at 4 p.m. on Saturday and end on Sunday evening. The interesting part is less about the duration and more about the way it's being presented. Both sides are rhetorically moving toward a ceasefire, but each is trying to claim the initiative for themselves. At the same time, the scope remains very limited. A temporary pause over a holiday is something completely different from a lasting ceasefire that is supposed to pave the way for a peace treaty. This is more about a short-term suspension of hostilities than a real political step. So the ceasefire is purely military in nature. In the Volgograd region, there has been a major fire at a gas compression station. Footage shows an ongoing fire inside the facility, indicating a situation that is difficult to control. Such stations are a central part of the energy infrastructure. They ensure that gas can be transported over long distances by, for example, maintaining pressure in the system. If such a facility fails, it doesn't just affect the immediate location, but can have an impact along the entire pipeline chain. What stands out again is the type of target. This is no longer about a warehouse or a single depot, but about functional nodes within the system itself, which then have effects on others. Exactly these points are hard to replace or bypass in the short term. How badly the facility is damaged can't be determined at the moment, but a prolonged fire in such a part of the infrastructure usually indicates that the effects will go beyond the immediate moment. Several Ukrainian analyses paint a fairly clear picture. Unmanned systems are increasingly becoming the central factor on the battlefield. For several months now, Ukrainian drone units are said to have put more Russian personnel out of action than Russia can bring in as reinforcements at the same time. In March alone, the impact increased again, reportedly by 29% compared to the previous month. Particularly striking is the area of the so-called middle strike capabilities, meaning attacks at ranges between 30 and 120 kilometers. Here, hundreds of hits were scored within a month, including logistics warehouses, checkpoints, as well as facilities from the energy and oil sector. At the same time, the use of ground-based unmanned systems is also noticeably increasing. The number of missions carried out has risen by more than 50% within a month. But, and this is crucial, the other side is catching up. According to Ukrainian intelligence, Russia has massively expanded its own drone forces. More than 100,000 soldiers are already said to be deployed in this area, with the goal of significantly increasing the number to more than 165,000 by the end of the year. This clearly shows that drone forces are being expanded. It's not about individual systems or individual attacks within the units, but about a separate so-called drone branch, which is growing larger on both sides and is increasingly acting independently. Zelenskyy has spoken unusually clearly about Ukraine's nuclear disarmament and later described it as an act of deception. What is meant by this is the decision in the 1990s to give up the Soviet nuclear arsenal and in return to rely on guarantees in case of an emergency. His criticism was directed less at the decision itself at the time and more at what has become of it. From the Ukrainian perspective, these guarantees should have been secured at least through NATO membership. The fact that this did not happen is now seen in retrospect as a major gap. It's also interesting how he describes the further course of events. According to him, Putin rejected various proposals that could have been used to test actual intentions. These included direct talks at the highest level about territorial issues or even the deployment of Western troops along the front line. At the same time, Zelenskyy warned that Russia's current goals should not be interpreted too narrowly. Even though the current focus is strongly on the Donbass, he does not see this as the final endpoint of the Russian attacks, but rather as an intermediate stage. Reading between the lines, everything else becomes clear. This is not about individual territories or front lines, but rather about the fundamental reassessment of security guarantees and what they are actually worth in a real emergency. This is very relevant in light of Trump's statements, as he is currently considering a U.S. withdrawal from NATO. Zelenskyy has also provided insights into developments that, at first glance, don't seem directly related to the front, but strategically, they have far-reaching implications. Strategically, Zelenskyy has also provided insights into a development that, at first glance, has nothing to do with the front. Accordingly, Ukraine has already concluded long-term security agreements with several countries in the Middle East. Further talks are currently underway, including with Oman, Kuwait, and Bahrain. The core of these deals is unusually clearly stated. Ukrainian companies and expertise provide on-site support for the protection of critical infrastructure. In return, Ukraine receives specific benefits. The key point is about interceptor missiles, which the Ukrainians are currently desperately lacking. They'll get air defense support, which the U.S. isn't providing now. Fuels such as diesel, and in some cases even crude oil, that will be further processed in Europe are also supposed to be part of these deals. There are also financial components involved, so it's not just classic aid, but also money security in exchange for resources. When you put it all together, you get a pretty clear picture. Ukraine is now exporting something they have in abundance, and which is in great shortage both in the Middle East and for us Europeans. Experience with drones, airstrikes, and defending infrastructure. And that's exactly what's suddenly relevant for states in the Middle East, especially with regard to threats from drones or missiles coming from Iran. It's also interesting to note what Ukraine needs in return. There are many indications that they are especially running out of older air defense systems and ammunition. So exactly what we also don't have available in larger quantities. And what takes a long time to produce but is still stored elsewhere, like in the Middle East. At first glance, that seems like a second choice. But in the current situation, something completely different matters: availability and quantity. And that's exactly what Ukraine is obviously working on here, not just at the front, but also globally. And, as we can see, it's working very well. Over a period of about 10 days, Ukrainian special forces have launched a series of drone attacks, with a clear focus on logistics, depots, and repairs in Russian-controlled territory. Among other things, ammunition depots in Doshansk and Zbenivka were hit, both more than 100 kilometers away from the front. In addition, there are more depots in the areas of Mariupol, Tokmak, and Velika Novosilka, as well as fuel facilities and supply hubs along important supply routes. Repair and maintenance bases have also been specifically targeted. These kinds of locations are crucial for making damaged equipment operational again and for compensating for losses. What stands out here is that it's not about spectacular hits, but rather about a whole series of strikes against different targets in the same chain: ammunition, fuel, repairs, and maintenance. So everything a unit needs to function over the long term. And that creates a certain effect. It's not immediately visible at the front, but it definitely has a delayed impact. And for that, we would need to hit even more facilities. But overall, it can be said, less supplies, longer repair times, more pressure on existing resources. And with that, I want to thank all subscribers, channel members, and the Algo crew. A special thanks goes to Oberst Leutnant Renekis, Selektiv Ferdio Meyerhofer. Please subscribe, leave a like, and leave comments. And see you in the next Situation Report.